Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into an article from Global Citizen.
Okay.
It was published January 29th, 2025.
Pretty recent.
Yeah, pretty recent. It's called "The U.S. Administration Freezes Foreign Aid: A Crisis in the Making." So, this is something that could be really interesting to a lot of different people, right? Maybe you work with global health initiatives.
Yeah, for sure.
Or maybe you're just curious about, America first.
Yeah.
And those kind of policies.
Right.
Or maybe you're just, someone who likes to kind of keep up with like what kind of impact the U.S. is having on the world stage.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested in that these days.
Absolutely. So whatever your reason, today we're going to try to take a look at what this recent freeze on U.S. foreign aid actually means, like, on the ground, why it's happening, and what some of the consequences could be.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, both globally and right here at home.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a pretty big deal, right? They didn't slowly reduce spending or anything. This was like a complete halt.
Yeah, very disruptive.
Very sudden.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the freeze itself? Like, what exactly happened?
Well, the new administration kind of like right off the bat, right? They issued an executive order that freezes all new spending on international assistance.
Okay.
And then the State Department followed up with the stop work order, right, on current grants and contracts that are already in place for foreign aid programs.
It's like a hard stop to everything.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
So it impacts pretty much all foreign aid for at least 3 months, which, that's a pretty significant disruption to a lot of things.
3 months sounds short, but I guess if you're working on something long term,
It can be huge.
in the field,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big gap.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like, oh, we'll just pause it and come back to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of momentum in these programs.
Now, the article did mention that there were a few exceptions, right?
Yeah, there are a few. So military aid to Israel and Egypt.
Okay.
That's still continuing as normal. Also, emergency food assistance. So really, really dire situations where people need food immediately. And also travel expenses for government employees
Makes sense.
returning to their stations. The State Department is accepting applications for waivers on a case-by-case basis, so it's possible that some programs might be able to continue if they can demonstrate that they're really essential. But, it's unclear right now what the timeline is for those waivers, and so far only HIV treatment programs have gotten one.
So it's like they're being pretty strict about it.
Very strict.
What's the stated reason for doing this freeze?
Well, the administration says, this is all about creating what they're calling like a centralized repository for review. It'll be overseen by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And they're saying, they're doing this just to be sure that all the spending that's happening, is actually in line with, the administration's America First policy agenda.
Okay, so America First is playing a big role in this.
Huge, huge. They're basically saying that they want to make sure that every dollar that's spent on foreign aid is actually benefiting America. So they're asking these 3 questions, like, does this spending make America safer,
Okay.
stronger, more prosperous?
I see. So they're really trying to kind of like
Vet these programs?
vet everything,
Right,
make sure that it's aligning.
Yeah, with that America First agenda.
It sounds like this centralized repository could be a pretty big change.
Huge.
How do you think that's going to work, like, in practice,
It's hard to say for sure, but it seems like, probably all the aid programs are going to have to go through this review process.
Sure.
And then they'll have to kind of justify their existence based on these 3 criteria.
Right. Justify how they make America safer, stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
It makes you wonder, though, right?
Right.
Like, how effective is that going to be? Like, will it actually achieve those goals? And what are, like, the potential downsides, right?
Unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it also makes me wonder, can they even legally freeze funds that have already been approved by Congress?
Right.
Like, isn't that kind of like overstepping their bounds?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. You see, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse, which means they get to decide how to spend federal funding.
Right.
And the executive branch is supposed to carry out those spending decisions.
But in this case,
right, they seem to have kind of neglected a pretty crucial step.
Okay.
They're supposed to send a special message to Congress, right, which would outline the details and the justification for the freeze.
So they just kind of like skip that part?
It seems that way, yeah. And that's a pretty big deal because, it could lead to a clash between Congress and the president.
Oh, wow. So we could see, like, a power struggle here.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, all this is going on. What's happening with all the aid organizations? Like, what's happening on the ground?
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty chaotic right now, a lot of uncertainty. The article kind of paints a picture of, organizations that are having to lay off staff, programs that are being disrupted, and millions of people who are being left in some pretty precarious situations.
I mean, can you give me some concrete examples? I'm having trouble kind of picturing what that actually looks like.
Yeah, sure. So imagine a program that, monitors for diseases like the bird flu, for example.
Okay.
This outbreak has now spread to 49 countries, including the U.S.
Wow.
And it's really important to be able to monitor that and keep it under control. That's just one example. You could also think about the counterterrorism training that's been happening in Somalia.
Right.
Without that training, the region could become destabilized.
Oh, I see.
And that could lead to, further conflict.
Right.
Potentially create a breeding ground for terrorism.
So that seems to go directly against what they're trying to do by
exactly.
making it safer.
It's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
There are also, think about all the programs to eradicate diseases like tuberculosis and malaria.
Right.
Those affect millions of people worldwide. And if we, stop funding those programs, those diseases could resurge.
Oh, well.
Leading to, widespread suffering and death.
Yeah, those are huge problems that have been kind of, on the decline.
We've made so much progress, but it's fragile,
And it also makes me think about, we were talking about America First and trying to protect the U.S.
Right.
But there are also all these programs that have been giving support to U.S. military allies like Jordan, Taiwan, Ukraine.
Yeah, and providing resources for things like anti-narcotics enforcement training in places like Mexico and Colombia, and civilian assistance for U.S. military allies.
So cutting these programs could actually make us less safe in the long run.
Potentially, yeah.
Wow. I mean, it really seems like there's, a lot more to consider here than just this simple idea of we're just giving money away.
Exactly.
And what about regular people? Are there any specific programs that you think we should be worried about in terms of the impact on individuals?
Well, one of the things that I think is really alarming is the impact on healthcare, specifically for women and children. The article mentions that, over 90 million women and children are going to lose access to things like essential healthcare, like medicines, vaccines, prenatal care.
I mean, that's a lot of people.
It's a staggering number, and it's hard to, to even fathom the human cost of that.
The article does seem to kind of push back on the administration's claim that foreign aid is just a handout, though.
Right. Yeah, definitely. The expert voice in the article, they really make the case for foreign aid as a strategic investment. They argue that it actually makes the world a safer place, a stronger place, a more prosperous place, and that, that's a good thing for everybody involved.
Okay, I see.
So it's not just about charity.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we all benefit from a more stable and prosperous world.
So how does that tie back into what the Secretary of State was talking about? The whole safer, stronger, more prosperous.
That's a great question. And you know what? Maybe that's a good place to kind of take a little pause here. We can come back in the next part of our deep dive and really kind of take a closer look at how foreign aid can actually help achieve those goals.
Yeah, that sounds good.
How can it make America safer?
Yeah.
Stronger, more prosperous.
Let's dig into that.
Need a doctor? Struggling to find trusted healthcare worldwide? MedXBay has you covered. From telehealth to in-person care, MedXBay connects you to verified doctors, holistic practitioners, and specialists, wherever you are. Say goodbye to long wait times and misinformation. Book appointments instantly, access quality care, and take charge of your health. All in one place. Join MedXBay today for free at medxbay.com. Your health, your way. Anytime, anywhere.
So right before the break, we were talking about this idea that foreign aid, it's not just a handout.
Right.
It's actually a strategic investment. And I got to say, that's kind of a new idea to me.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it is.
Yeah, and it's tough to wrap your head around it at first.
Yeah.
But the more I hear about the potential impact, the more I'm starting to think, well, maybe that's true.
Yeah, it really is about kind of shifting your perspective a little bit.
Yeah, so walk me through this. How does foreign aid actually make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous?
Okay, so let's start with the safety aspect. So, we were talking earlier about global health programs and how those help prevent the spread of infectious diseases, right? Well, think about it. Those programs are actually directly contributing to U.S. security by reducing the risk of pandemics. I mean, we all saw with COVID how quickly a virus can spread across borders and disrupt absolutely everything.
It was like the whole world just got turned upside down.
It did, yeah. It really highlighted how interconnected we all are. So investing in global health security, it's not just about being altruistic. It's really an investment in our own security.
Okay.
And it's not just about pandemics either, right? I mean, aid can also help to stabilize at-risk regions, which can then prevent conflict and terrorism.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if people have their basic needs met,
right?
Food, water, healthcare, they're less likely to be drawn into those sorts of things.
Exactly. So by addressing those root causes of conflict, poverty, inequality, we can create a more peaceful world, a more stable world, and that benefits everyone, including the U.S.
So that's the safer part. What about stronger? How does foreign aid make America stronger?
Well, one way is by strengthening our alliances and partnerships around the world.
Oh.
When we provide aid to other countries, we're not just giving them money, we're actually building relationships.
Right.
We're showing that we're committed to their well-being.
So it's about building trust.
It really is, yeah. And that can lead to stronger diplomatic ties, more cooperation on global issues, and you know what? A greater influence on the world stage.
So it's not just about charity, it's really about working together.
It is.
To solve problems.
It's recognizing that we're all in this together.
Okay.
And by helping others, we're ultimately helping ourselves.
I like that. Okay, so we talked about safer, we talked about stronger. Now how about more prosperous?
Yeah.
How does foreign aid make America more prosperous?
Well, one way is that it can help open up new markets for U.S. businesses.
Okay.
When we help other countries develop their economies, they become better trading partners, which leads to increased exports and economic growth here at home.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. The more money people have, the more they can buy.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about trade either, right? Aid can also help foster innovation and entrepreneurship in developing countries, which can then lead to, new technologies and ideas that benefit everyone.
So the argument is that it's not just giving money away. It's actually...
It's an investment.
An investment.
It can create a virtuous cycle where everyone benefits.
Yeah. I mean, that is a really compelling argument. And it does seem like, with this America First agenda, maybe the administration isn't considering all of these long-term benefits.
Yeah. I mean, are they really looking at the big picture? It makes you wonder, what are the potential consequences of this freeze?
Right. I mean, we've talked about the immediate impacts for organizations.
Right. And the people they serve.
Yeah, and the people they serve. But what about more broadly? What does this mean for the U.S.'s role as a leader in the world?
That's a huge question. I mean, for decades, the U.S. has really been a leader in global development and humanitarian assistance.
Right.
And this freeze, it could be a signal that we're retreating from that role.
Right.
And that could have some pretty significant geopolitical consequences.
So what might that look like?
Well, for one thing, it could create a vacuum, right? And other countries or organizations might try to fill that vacuum.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about China, for example. They've been increasing their foreign aid in recent years. And some people see that as a way to, increase their influence around the world.
Right. So it becomes this sort of geopolitical power struggle.
Yeah.
Where aid is just a tool.
Yeah, almost like a weapon in a way, right?
And it's not just about China either, right? You could have...
It could be other countries, regional blocs, even private philanthropists.
Right. So it's more about this fragmentation of the global landscape.
Right. Exactly.
And that makes me think about the even bigger picture here, right? We're facing these huge global challenges, climate change, pandemics, things that really require all the countries working together.
Yeah.
Could this freeze actually make those problems even harder to solve?
Absolutely. When the U.S. steps back, it's not just about the money.
Yeah.
It's also about the fact that, we're kind of undermining these collaborative efforts that are so essential to tackling these really complex issues.
So it's almost like, we're not just worried about who's going to fill the gap.
Right.
We're worried about if anyone can even do what the U.S. has been doing.
Right. Can anyone really step into that leadership role?
Yeah. And that takes us back to, the Secretary of State's questions, right? Does it make America safer?
Stronger?
More prosperous? It seems like maybe the answer is no.
Yeah, I think in the long run, this attempt to put America first,
Right.
it could actually lead to a less safe world, a less stable world, and ultimately a less prosperous world for everyone, including the U.S.
Wow, that's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
And, I'm sure our listeners were out there thinking, like, okay, so what can we do about this? This all feels so big.
It's overwhelming, right?
Yeah, where do you even start?
Yeah, but it's important to remember that this is, it's a dynamic situation. Things can change. Yeah. I think the most important thing is to stay informed.
Yep.
Okay? Keep an eye on how Congress responds to this. Do they push back against the freeze?
Right.
What happens with this legal battle over the power of the purse?
Yeah.
Pay attention to that.
So beyond just, like, watching it all play out, what can people actually do?
Well, don't underestimate the power of your voice, right?
Yeah.
You can reach out to your elected representatives.
Okay, yeah.
Let them know that you're concerned about this, that it's important to you.
Yeah.
And why it's important to you. I mean, collective action, it can make a difference.
Yeah, it's easy to think that your little voice doesn't matter, but if enough people make some noise,
yeah.
it can really make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, consider supporting organizations that are working to fill the gaps left by this freeze.
Uh-huh.
There are a lot of NGOs and aid groups out there.
Yeah.
They're doing amazing work, and they need our support now more than ever.
Okay.
Even small contributions can make a big difference on the ground.
So it's kind of, multi-pronged approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stay informed, reach out to your officials, support the people who are doing the work.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, it feels like a really daunting situation, but it sounds like there's actually a lot we can do.
There is.
Right.
This isn't a time to just sit back and be apathetic.
Right.
This freeze has huge implications
Yeah.
that are going to shape the world for years to come.
Right.
And the choices we make now, both individually and collectively, they're going to determine the kind of future we create.
That's a really powerful message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of U.S. foreign aid.
My pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground, everything from the immediate impacts to what might happen, 10 years down the road.
Right.
And we really hope this has helped, shed some light on this really critical issue and inspired you to maybe go out and learn more, talk to people about it, maybe even take action.
Absolutely. And remember, the world is interconnected, and what we do here in the U.S., it has consequences everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's really up to all of us to, be informed, be engaged, and be active participants in shaping a better future for everyone.
Well said. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll be back next time with another deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
Ready to unpack it all with you.